Chief. Welcome to Thursday Collection Connection, where we're playing that game. It's just an excuse to talk about records. I play with my brother, Plastic Eric from the Plastic Soundwave Cult, and his videos are every Monday, mine are every Thursday, and you can follow along with us by subscribing to both channels. In Eric's last video, he talked about Sonic Youth's Goo album, and it's interesting to me that Sonic Youth was just outside of my purview at the time, at the time that Goo was released. I was certainly aware of them, but they weren't the kind of band that got a lot of airplay. And so I didn't really know their music, and I operated more on an impression than from strict knowledge of what they sounded like. It was the little bits that I heard were like noise rock that maybe I was not ready for at that time. And it's interesting, I have one of their albums. I have Dirty, which was the album that followed Goo. And so I listened to both records, Goo and the one I just said, Dirty. And it was interesting. It's funny that I have one of their albums that I literally never listened to. About half the album had 0 playback stats. And they sort of felt like a precursor to like Pavement in my head. Pavement maybe taking the noise rock and bringing it to more of a jam band place. These are just ideas that I had in my head. I still don't really know how accurate they are. But the Sonic Youth wasn't bad. It was, I don't know that it'll ever be my favorite music, but it was listenable. I knew, in spite of owning one of their albums, I didn't really know that they traded off. Kim Gordon, I'm assuming Thurston Moore was the other guy singing. They traded off vocals on songs. I really had no idea. This is how little I know about Sonic Youth. So it was interesting and more palatable. It's kind of like my experience with television, queuing up Marquee Moon for the first time and being disabused of a notion that I had, long-standing notion that I had, that was instrumental music. You know, very weird. It's weird how you operate under certain notions that have no basis necessarily, or limited basis, in fact. As far as a connection, would have been perfect if I owned any Black Flag, because the cover illustration was drawn by the same guy whose name I've already gone and forgotten. Maybe I'll pop it up on the screen here. Is most well known for his illustrations on a number of Black Flag albums. And barring that, not having any album that he had done an album cover for, I thought about just kind of a comic panel in general. Like Big Brother and the Holding Company, which is, if I'm getting it right, famously drawn by R. Crumb. That cover, but I don't have that album. I thought about the Fratellis, We Need Medicine, which is kind of a comic panel style cover, but that felt weird in a very bizarrely specific way of an F band from the UK from the 2000s, in the wake in recent weeks of both the Future Heads and Franz Ferdinand. A third such band felt like weirdly going to the same well too often. And so, kind of sticking with the cover, what I decided to go with was the fact that, in spite of having some text on the cover and the band name in this sort of comic panel, it does not actually have the album title anywhere in that text on the album cover. And so I looked around to find if I had anything that had words on the cover but did not have the album title on the cover. And you really won't see this coming at all. You might even be surprised, Eric, to know that I own this album, but the thing that I came up with was the 1968 Rolling Stones album, Beggar's Banquet, not to be confused with Upside Down Beggar's Banquet. So this cover, the cover that's probably on the screen right now, was not, it was the initial planned cover but was rejected. And so a lot of the early issues, all of the early LP issues and stuff, had a, not a plain brown wrapper, but a very simplified, sort of like an invitation, just Rolling Stone, Beggar's Banquet, RSVP, I think, on the cover. So even though this was proposed as the original cover, didn't happen that way, but did emerge later, and complicating things even more, some of the variants of the Toilet Stall album cover do have Beggar's Banquet scrawled on the cover as well, and sort of like a red lipstick, just like the band name, the Rolling Stones, on there. And my version doesn't have that. And so all the graffiti written on the wall does not include the phrase Beggar's Banquet. It shows up in tiny letters written amongst, it's kind of right here on the backside, along with some song names and a bunch of other things. And like some other bands from the 60s, early 70s that I have talked about, the only reason I have this album is because I go through periods of trying to understand the foundations that built the music that I love. I think of Spoon oftentimes as being very Stonesy in their kind of swaggered approach. But yeah, I bought Beggar's Banquet specifically because it was the one that contains Sympathy for the Devil, which is not the only, but is the primary Rolling Stones song that I just unreservedly, that was atrocious, enjoy unreservedly. But it didn't feel like a lot of the words. So if you want a hot take on on an album that's older than I am, I was never kind of floored by the rest of it. I think Street Fighting Man is probably the other primary song on there that people will just sort of generally know for it being in the atmosphere. But even then, I had to hear the song to match it to the title. I was like, oh, I think I know that title. And then when I heard the song, I was like, okay, yeah, I do know that song, but I don't know that I would have ever known that that song was called Street Fighting Man. I never listened to it that closely. But besides that, and I think maybe Stray Cat Blues and Salt of the Earth, which was more gospel-y, it goes straight from Sympathy for the Devil as the opening track into No Expectations, which feels a lot to me. Again, as always, reverse engineering my way back to earlier sounds. It sounds like a U2 track from their Americana period. It sounds like their Rattle and Hum days. And you can take that as a compliment or an insult, but it's just, that's what it made me think of. Slide guitar, and then in its way, the closing track, Salt of the Earth, the gospel elements of that feel, again, like something U2 would have done in their love of Americana period. And so the rest of it, so you had about 4 songs that sounded like the Rolling Stones. You had a couple of songs that sounded to me like U2. Granted, they came decades before. U2 did the same thing. And then the rest of it, really, if you had told me the rest of them were Bob Dylan covers, I would have believed you. They sound very indebted to Dylan to me. And again, that is coming from a place of somewhat ignorance. I have a Dylan album the same way I have a Rolling Stones album, and both purchases sort of reaffirmed to me that I may love their progeny. I may love the Robin Hitchcocks that love Bob Dylan, and I may love the Spoons that dug on the Stones. Um, but the shoulders of the giants that they stood on don't necessarily appeal to me all that much. I'm certainly not saying it's terrible music, but it doesn't grab me. I would rather listen to Spoon, and I would rather listen to Robin Hitchcock. So that's very interesting to me. Not to trash anybody, we try and stay positive on albums. I just think it's interesting that I repeat this experience of when I go back. I don't know if it's just the contrarian in me. That's possible. But these 5-star heralded all-time Rolling Stone top 500 albums of all time, which Beggar's Banquet has shown up on, I think, every time Rolling Stone has done a top 500 albums list. Leaves me wanting more than it gives me. I really want to feel like this was groundbreaking, and they either feel too derivative of stuff that came before it, as is the case with Beggar's Banquet, with the exception of Sympathy for the Devil, or eclipsed by the achievements of the people who built on their work. So anyway, I'd say something controversial, and maybe that'll spur engagement. Who knows? But I'm not shitting on Beggar's Banquet, and it's not bad. I didn't think, this is bad. I just thought, is this one of the 500 greatest albums ever? I don't know. It certainly wouldn't make my list. And it didn't inspire me to buy any more Rolling Stones after this one, even including the one song that I love from them the most. So anyway, I guess I will wrap it up on that. That's probably well over my 5 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes. So I will turn that over to Eric. He has a few days to listen to Beggar's Banquet and come up with his response, which you can look for on Monday. And anybody else who followed us all the way to the end here, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.